for me, Lost in Space was the perfect experience as an actor and, you know, as a kid. Here's the deal with my romper room experience. I broke my leg when I was just shy of 4 years old, playing Zorro. And of course, Guy Williams, who was Zorro, became my dad in Lost in Space, which was kind of a full circle thing for me. But, so I broke my leg playing Zorro, and I was in a cast for whatever it was, 12 weeks or something. And really all I could do was watch TV. And of course, in those days, you know, we didn't have TiVo or DVDs or anything. You had to just wait to see what was actually on TV. And so I watched every day. I waited for Superman and I waited for Zorro. And I just became fixated on becoming an adventure hero on TV at the age of 4. I really bugged my parents about doing that. And my mom had been a writer's secretary at 20th Century Fox for 10, 11 years before I was born. And my grandfather, who had passed away before I was born, had been a pretty successful agent during the 30s. Boris Karloff being his most famous client. He got him the gig as Frankenstein and stuff. So anyway, from my mother's side of the family, they weren't impressed by or intimidated by the entertainment business. It was just something that, you know, they did. So I was really serious about wanting to get in TV, and my mom thought, well, you know, only child, you know, she was 41 when I was born. She'd kind of gone through her worry days on her own. And she said, well, if he really wants to do this, well, you know, we'll check it out. We live here in Beverly Woods, stone's throw from where we are right now. Like I said, she'd worked at the studios a lot. So she said, but before we pursue it, let's see if he's comfortable in front of a camera. And you could sign up for Romper Room. You could just go in like a civilian and get on Romper Room. So we went down to Romper Room, and we signed up for Romper Room. Miss Mary was my teacher. And normally you did it for a week. And I liked it so much, and I guess they liked me, that I did it for 2 weeks. I was a doobie. There's doobies and don't bees. I was a doobie. A prelude to the future. But I really enjoyed Romper Room. And most importantly, I was comfortable with cameras and lights around. I wasn't intimidated by it, and it didn't, you know, make me nervous or anything. So, so my mother felt, well, okay, he can be on a set. He's comfortable there, so we'll see what happens. And then you can't escape your destiny. I just started working a lot after that. Well, I'm so honored, really, to have those 3 original Twilight Zones in my show business tiara, so to speak. You know, they're great. They're great shows. I think the Twilight Zone is the best television series that was ever produced, and I was lucky to be a part of it. They're brilliantly written, and for the most part, the acting is just really great. And it's a subtle show. You know, it's less than more. I mean, even when Anthony Fremont is wishing people away or turning them into monsters and things like that, you don't see a lot of it. It's left to the audience's imagination. In terms of my preparation for Anthony, at the old age of, I think I was 7 when we shot that show, which meant I had been working in front of the cameras for like 2 years. Getting to play someone who had powers is what I wanted in the first place. That's why I wanted to become an actor, to become like this superhero kind of guy. So Anthony Fremont was a superpowered guy, almost to the nth degree, right? Because, you know, not only could he literally manifest whatever he wanted, he was also well aware of what everybody was thinking. So the director of that particular show, It's a Good Life, was James Sheldon, and I had worked with him previously on an hour-long episode of the Loretta Young Show that Cloris Leachman played my mother in. And it was a really good show, and it was the story, I'm sidetracking here, I know, but that was the story of a boy who has this imaginary friend. So there was a lot of fantasy involved in that plot. And I think James Sheldon and Cloris Leachman, when this script came along, I don't know who who thought, well, you know, that Mumy kid would be good. But I had already done a Twilight Zone previous to that, a long distance call. So I know I didn't audition for it. I was given, the part was offered to me, and I just loved the fact that Anthony had these powers, and I certainly was aware that he had the powers in terms of what inner workings you have as a child actor. Beyond that, I worked on the eye thing, you know, in terms of when he used his powers, his eyes got big, and I didn't realize it until many decades later that his nostrils flared. But it's true, when Anthony does something, it's like a, you know, it's like that. Now, the cool little addendum to that story is that 40 years later, the Twilight Zone was revived for UPN, and to make a long story short, we got to do a true sequel to that story, to It's a Good Life, with Cloris Leachman, and the cherry on top was the fact that my own daughter, Liliana, who's a very gifted actress, got to play Anthony's daughter, who it turns out has even more power than he does in the same arena of abilities. So to be able to return to a character that has been deemed classic, or an episode that was deemed classic, to be able to return to that alone is a great honor, and to be able to do it with your own family, that's the highlight of my career. That if you bookend It's a Good Life and It's Still a Good Life, and I hope I have many more highlights to come, but if you just bookend that, to be able to return to that alongside Cloris, who is a gift to any actor who works with her. She's just inspiring and pure brilliance. And to work with Liliana was just, that was a real joy. I was very happy to do that. It's actually true, and I don't know if that speaks volumes about my sanity or not, but there are a couple of characters, and I think other actors will say this, there are characters that you are given the opportunity to create for, with someone else's script, but you're given the opportunity to create these characters, and some of them stay with you. Bits and pieces of them do stay with you. And Anthony Fremont, all the line, stayed with me. I used to, when my mother used to drive me in a 1959 pink Cadillac that I was so embarrassed to be seen in at the time, and now, of course, I wish was in my garage. But that's what she drove, a pink 59 Cadillac, and she used to drive me from the West Side, Beverlywood, to Universal, or wherever we were filming these various shows. And I used to and she wouldn't drive the freeways, for whatever reason, right? She'd take the long way around. And I used to sit in the back, no seat belts in those days or anything, listening to KFWB, Channel 98, listening to Ricky Nelson records and Beach Boys and stuff, and just hope no one that I knew would see me in this pink car. But when we were in traffic jams, I would seriously, in my own belief, I would seriously change the traffic lights so that we wouldn't have to be stopped, at Cahuenga or Sepulveda and Pico or whatever, that we'd get to keep moving. And I did that. And then, of course, in school, I wished many teachers into the cornfield, and in later life, a few directors and things. But I have kept Anthony alive within me, or he's kept himself alive within me. I found Mr. Rod Serling to be light and very energetic, funny, and completely inspiring. The reality about an anthology show is you don't have a regular cast. So, by not having a regular cast, no actor gets to become fabulous and gets to become an egoed out, tantrum throwing, I'm not leaving my trailer kind of guy. Because you're there for 4 days, or you're there for 5 days, you're getting your paycheck, you're with the Twilight Zone or Playhouse 90 or whatever those older shows might have been. Generally, you're dealing with great scripts. You're lucky to get the gig, and you're going to be there for a very short amount of time. So that keeps the whole actor ego star of a television series out of that picture, which is a big thing. Because no matter how nice people are and how talented they are, people tend to, when a show's a success, people tend to get fabulous about and complacent in their part of it. And I'm sure that's always been the case, and it just gets worse and worse as the decades roll on. But Rod Serling was the star of that television show. He was the only physical character that the audience saw every episode. So besides being the complete creative visionary of the project, he's the guy that was on set every episode doing those bumpers. Well, as I recall very clearly, when a lot of other executive creator, writer, producer type people came on sets, it caused the crew to be very uptight. Oh, Irwin Allen's here. Tension, right? Oh, whatever. Alfred Hitchcock's here, or Lucy's here, or whatever it was. You know, it's business, and people are looking at their watches. But when Rod Serling came onto the set of the 3 Twilight Zones that I was a part of, what I remember is everybody was like, oh, great, Rod's here. I got a question for you about this, or I want to talk to you about this, or I loved this, how did you come up? And he'd sit and he would talk to all the different department heads about, you know, what was happening next, or what was going to be in the tomorrow's thing, or whatever. But they all flocked to him as somebody they really got strength and energy from. And I remember him telling jokes. I don't remember what the jokes were, you know. It's not like I say, you know, he and I used to go out for margaritas after we rapped every night. I was, what, 6, 7, and 9 or something when I did those shows? So I can't say that I knew the man really well at all, but I can say that I had a very comfortable feeling and relationship with him when I was around him, that I can say I'm flattered that I think he generally liked what I contributed to his projects. And when they did the feature film, his wife, Carol, and Buck Houghton, who was the original producer, called me and asked me if I would do a little cameo in that. I was flattered that they thought of me and was happy to do it. And I think the Twilight Zone's great. Well, Rod Serling makes the Twilight Zone special because he's a true visionary. And although he didn't write every single episode of the Twilight Zone, I think that if you were to find an unpublished, unfilmed Rod Serling teleplay, and if you were to have The Simpsons do it, you'd recognize that as Rod Serling's work. No matter if it was done in cartoon voices, no matter if it anything, honestly, there's a rhythm, there's an iambic pentameter to the way he writes dialogue. It's like Jimi Hendrix, you know? If Jimi Hendrix is playing guitar, whether it's on his own record or jamming with any number of people, you'll know, oh, that's Hendrix, right? I mean, there's singular voices in arts. Miles Davis, if he's playing, you go, oh, that's Miles Davis, right? You can't say that about a lot of people, but you can say that about Rod Serling, and his words, his teleplays are singular, and I think that's what made the Twilight Zone so great. Also, the fact that in those days, a visionary who fought for control of his project got it sometimes, you know? And Rod Serling had Buck Houghton to ride shotgun for him, who believed in him 100%. And they stayed true to what they wanted to do for the most part with the Twilight Zone. I know there was some budget cuts where they went to tape. One of the episodes I did was taped. I think they only did 6 of them. But that was something they fought against. They did it for a half a dozen episodes, and then I think they went back to CBS and said, told you, can we please go back to film now? And they went, yeah. But, he had control of that project. It was his. He didn't, if you look at a television show today, for better or worse, and I don't mean to sound like the old pioneer here, but if you look at the list of producers on a television show, there's dozens of them, literally like 12, 14 producers on a show. Well, any one of them wants to justify their salary. So every one of them wants to tweak it a little bit and add their little changes. And, well, here are my notes, right? So if you're a writer and you've got 14 producers giving you notes, even if you're employing them, if you've got all these notes and the network's giving you notes and everybody's messing with your stuff, I don't see how it can truly stay true to the vision that you created it from. And I wish people allowed people to stay true to their visions more. I think we'd have better quality projects for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff being made, but I know people fight really hard to stay true and stay on the path. And I think that Rod Serling was able to control that. Well, the Twilight Zones are largely parables, moral parables, set within different left-of-center arenas, you know, or with these little quirks in there that take you out of what would normally be preachy. So he succeeds by twisting the framework of the reality that you're watching. Yeah. For me, I can't speak for other kids, but for me, Lost in Space was the perfect experience as an actor and, you know, as a kid. As I had said, I wanted to go into television to be like Superman or Zorro, to be a hero, to be a superhero. Here comes the opportunity to put on superhero outfits, literally these colorful, weird, you know, silver spacesuits or the purple and red, whatever they were, these superhero outfits, to literally carry a laser gun and to use it. I mean, Will Robinson, you know, shot this giant Cyclops who was out to kill his dad and Major West. You know, I mean, he controlled the robot. He could reprogram the robot. He could fly the ship. He fixed everything that was broken. He saved the day legitimately probably 70 out of 84 episodes. Will was the catalyst to like getting their butts out of the fire. Who wouldn't have loved that? I never had a bad day going to work on that show. I rode my bike from my house to the studio. I lived probably less than a mile, just straight up Motor Avenue, straight into the gate. My purple Schwinn Stingray, which I still have. I loved the people I worked with. They're still very, very close friends of mine. It is like a legitimate dysfunctional family, but I do love them, dear, like legitimately, really like family members. I love them. And the chemistry that evolved between me or between Will and Dr. Smith and the robot, that was great. That was special. That was a special little trinity. You know, you got Kirk, Spock, and Bones. You got you know, I don't know. There's a lot of trios in show business, but the Smith, the robot, and Will, that's a good one. We really had a great little connection, a great little energy. I loved working with Jonathan. And he used to completely rewrite every single solitary line that was on the page for him. Absolutely, I don't know how he ever managed to get carte blanche to do that from Irwin Allen, because Irwin Allen was a very stiff, control freak kind of guy. But Jonathan, I'd memorize the script, and before we'd shoot any scene, Jonathan would, Billy Person, come into my dressing room, we're going over the scene. And I knew what I was going to say, and you know, he'd sit there and say, now you can see it's not as it was on the page. Let's go. And he would do it, and he would say his lines, which were completely different, and he added all these wonderful, wonderful insults to the robot, which he spent hours writing, and he just completely recreated that character, all on his own. He was, like it or hate it, Jonathan was responsible for the creation of Dr. Smith beyond the first couple of shows, where he was just a snarling, murderous spy saboteur. He turned him into that kind of bumbling guy you love to hate. Jonathan used to tell the story that midway through the first season, as he was Jonathan said that he knew that if he just played this snarling villain, that he would be killed off. The character would be bumped off, and it would be back to the Pioneer family against the alien elements of Lost in Space. And, you know, as it was, he was this Long John Silver kind of character that was inserted into the mix. So he started playing him comedically. Even if his dialogue was villainous, he started playing him with the, oh dear, and all that stuff. And according to Jonathan, one day Irwin Allen came down to the set and said, you. And Jonathan went, yes. And Irwin said, I know what you're doing. Jonathan was like, And Irwin said, do more. And I suppose that if that's the way it went down, I suppose that was the springboard for him to say, oh, yes, I will do more. Yes, I will. and he certainly did. No. At the time, I was never conscious of, this is true. I don't think anyone's ever asked me this before. But the truth is, at the time, I was not the slightest bit conscious of the fact that other kids were inspired by or moved by in any way what I was doing. I was aware of the fact that I was recognizable. I was aware of the fact that I was on TV. But I never thought that it was making an impression on anybody. You know, I had the same small group of friends that I'd had since I was 9 or 6 or whatever. They never treated me special or different than they ever had. With the exception of sometimes we would be playing whatever, army or wrestling and things like that. And I remember sometimes somebody like Jeff Kalmack would say, we can't hurt Billy. You can't hurt this one. He's got to go be on TV. You can't split his head open. But I never thought that, and as I became older and looked back on the show or realized that Lost in Space never goes away, that it's running all over the world all of the time, I've met so many people at NASA, engineers, scientists, astronauts, all sorts of people who say, when I was a kid, I wanted to be like Will Robinson, and that's why I went into laser technology, or that's why I joined the space program. And then you think, wow, Now, if I hadn't played Will Robinson, someone else would have played Will Robinson. So I don't know if it was my belief in the character or whatever that helped make that inspiring to people. But I didn't think of it when I was a kid. I wasn't aware of that at all.
Interesting.
Yeah, I never thought of that before. That was an interesting question. I mean, I've covered whatever. A lot of this stuff I've covered, we've talked about, and I don't mind talking about it at all. But that was something I'd never thought of before. That was good. Lost in Space started off as a black and white adventure ensemble. I don't know how science fiction those stories were, but we'll call it a science fiction adventure ensemble. And it went on the air in September of 1965. So you think about that era of time and you go, okay, well, Satisfaction was just coming out and things like that. The kind of I Want to Hold Your Hand era was passing. And things were progressing into more of a psychedelic space and a political space. The Dylan's tunes were starting to rule the airwaves. Folk rock was starting to rule the airwaves. And the birth of the counterculture in terms of it spreading from, say, London to everywhere was definitely visible. And the Vietnam War was getting uglier on a daily basis. So you had all these contrasting things going on. And by the second season of Lost in Space, because we were a success the first season, we went to color. And what color it was! What color it was! Oh my God! It's so bright. It's so colorful. I don't know what kind of film stock they were using, but my God, that show is bright. You went to that. And you did have Batman as competition, which was very campy. It was on the same time as we were, and it became a sensation. It was filmed on the same lot. We hung out together. And Batman became a big sensation, and it was campy. It was also the debut of Ronan Martin's Laugh-In that year, which was another extremely campy, we're go-go dancing, and Goldie Hawn is boop-boop-ding. And I mean, there was a lot of pop art change. Andy Warhol's work was just exploding on the scene. And I think that the writers and Irwin Allen, and obviously with encouragement from the network has to be going to Irwin Allen, hey, everybody's digging this Batman thing, make your space show a little more fun, right? I mean, I wasn't there privy to that conversation, but it's an assumption worth leaping to. So I just think there's a brief period in the world, that mid to late 60s explosion of color. Look how the Beatles were dressing. Look how everybody was you know, what they really seriously went out to dinner in. You know, it's, when you look on it now, it's like, are you kidding me? Right? But it was absolutely cool to do that then. It was the essence of fashion, and it was the essence of cool. So I think it was simply something that seeped a little quicker into Lost in Space than other projects. And then by the time other projects acclimated to that and started filtering into a lot of other shows, it was already fading. You know, and the 70s were starting to creep in, and it was a darker era. So I think it's just a very brief period in time that we fully capture in Lost in Space. I mean, it's a great little time capsule of pop culture. Honestly, from a personal standpoint, you know, I thought it was like, hey, cool, I get to be another, you know, member of the Legion of Superheroes. I mean, you know, it was like 3 seasons. I had 3 different costumes. I liked the first one best, which was more simple. It was a dark blue with a little red trim, and I liked that one the best. The next season was kind of a bright orange with a yellow turtle dicky. I recall that very well, and I didn't like that color on me. And, you know, orange. I wasn't a big fan of the second season. So when the third seasons came in and it was like this purple, yeah, I thought, well, that's better, you know. It was good. It was all good. I liked being a little superhero outfit guy. Irwin Allen is a complicated man to sum up, and my perspective of him comes from a adolescence experience. You know, I never had a bad time with Irwin Allen, and I knew him from the age of 10. You know, and 10 to 14 in terms of working with him, for him, all the time, and then I knew him peripherally after that until he passed away. Yes, Irwin did get a kick out of blowing things up and making big spectacles and these funny props and things like that. Irwin had a great ability for assembling teams, casts and crew, John Williams, you know, for assembling these teams and making really good pilots that sold. You know, kind of rehashing certain traditional ideas of fantasy and getting them sold to the network televisions, which is not an easy thing to do. Lost in Space was the most expensive television pilot ever produced at that point in time, which was like $20 or something, you know. But I mean, he was good at that. But he was incredibly budget conscious, and I was going to say cheap, but you know, I don't know if he was cheap. But he was very budget conscious. And once those shows got on the air, they really went into like an autopilot kind of mode, and I think he was cheap with them. He didn't want to go over schedule. He didn't want to shoot an extra day. He didn't want to go into overtime. He didn't want to have to get an expensive look for the aliens things. Now, you got to remember, this is a guy, at this point in time, he had Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea on 2 stages on Fox. He had Lost in Space on 2 or 3 stages on Fox. He was shooting The Time Tunnel on Fox, and he also was prepping Land of the Giants. I think he did a couple other series pilots at the same time, Man from Atlantis. I don't know what they were, but he was really ruling the roost. He had the big offices and the big desk and a lot of people working for him. And he was the boss. And after things got going, he kept looking forward. So that by the time Lost in Space was in its 2nd season, he was probably more focused on Land of the Giants, which was fresh and brand new, than he was on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea or Lost in Space. So he would just come on the sets literally every day. And he'd look at his watch and he'd tap his watch. Right? Time is money. But it was very intimidating to the directors, because these directors, some of them were really good. And some of them were on autopilot and just trying to get through the pages every day. But Irwin would just come in and he'd walk up to the script supervisor and he'd see how much was in the can and how much they needed to go. And it was just like, get it done. Come on, get it done. And we were lucky. We had some great guest stars during their run on Lost in Space. You know, we had Michael Rennie, we had Kurt Russell, we had Wally Cox, we had Strother Martin, we had Henry Jones, we had John Carradine. You know, we had a lot of really classic actors in these ridiculous, you know, alien roles and stuff. But he did pick good people. Irwin picked good people, and it was a fun. For me, it was just a great time spent every day. There's 84 episodes of Lost in Space. I like, really, honestly and truly, I like about 15 or 20 of them. I mean, there's 15 or 20 that 40 years later, I can sit back comfortably and watch and go, that's a cool little twist, or that's funny. That's really funny. I didn't think that was funny at the time, but that's funny, and that was a good idea for 1965, and things like that. You know, and then there's a lot of them that to me are just, personally, that are just a little too ridiculous for me to enjoy. But when Will Robinson was delivering his dialogue, whether it was to Dr. Smith or whether it was to a talking carrot or whatever it might be, he believed what he was saying. You know, I mean, when Will was there, I might have read that script and gone, "Oi," you know, okay, we're doing this, all right. Even at 12 or 13, I might have gone, But when the camera was rolling, Will was definitely believing what he was around. So you know, I think that Will helped to ground the show to the audience because he really believed it. I mean, the rest of the cast, and this is not a put down at all, but you know, I mean, June and Mark, there were scenes where they were just laughing. I mean, they're just cracking up. It was, you know, I never did that. Oh, I loved the running, jumping, and exploding. I loved that, and I was the, you know, always willing to jump into the thick of, you know, something that was going to blow up and tumble around and, you know, try to look like a Jack Kirby panel. That was great for me. I know that Marta and Mark used to be frustrated because, for instance, the relationship between Don and Judy, which was implied and certainly written in the pilot and things, it really became non-existent to a point. And I know they wanted to develop that. I know that Guy and June perhaps felt, for a while, felt a little like, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be our show. You know, but I also know that there was never any friction on the set between Jonathan and Guy and June or anybody else. It was a very friendly set, no matter what anybody wants to think. The cast got along very well. Now, whether or not anybody's agent was on the phone talking to Irwin or somebody going, hey, you know, we want more scripts for this or we want this to change, that's a whole different thing. I don't know if that went down. I'm sure it did. But in terms of the way we all related to each other on those sound stages, it was truly a very happy place to work. It was not an unpleasant set, ever. And you know what? I think, and again, this is speculation on my part, and you got to take it for what it's worth. I don't think Guy was unhappy at all after a while. I think Guy was very happy to come in, instead of working from 7 in the morning till 8 at night, 5 days a week, I think he was kind of happy to come in for less hours, less days, make the same paycheck, and have more time to do what he wanted to do. I think he was like, this is a good gig. This is great. I go to work, I make money, I'm star of a television show, and I don't have to work that hard. I don't think he was unhappy about it. Well, even if you do have an ego, if you accept that, it's a job, right? I mean, you get a paycheck. I did a television series for 5 years in the 90s called Babylon 5, where I was under heavy alien makeup. And it was mind-bogglingly difficult, a physical thing for me to acclimate. I never acclimated to that. I never got used to the process of having foam rubber glued to my head for hours and then peeled off my face with strange solvents at the end of the day. And I actually went to the producers after the first season. This is the truth. I actually went to the producers and said, look, if you guys have like a plan for my character to like be the guy, I don't want it. I said, I really don't want it. I got 2 babies at my 2 little kids at my house. I'm here in the makeup room at 4 in the morning. You know, I'm happy working 2 or 3 days a week. And they were kind of like, are you kidding? You know, we got 11 other actors going, we want more. And I was very happy on Babylon 5 when I got a script and I worked a couple of days, as opposed to 8 days or 7 days. I was very happy. Same amount of money. I didn't get any less money if I worked one day or if I worked every day. So I thought they were great shows. I thought Joe Straczynski, who wrote the show, wrote great scripts. But I was glad that I wasn't often in more than 3 or 4 days. I was glad about that. The Great Vegetable Rebellion is, as Dan Aykroyd would say on Saturday Night Live as Leonard Pinth-Garnell, deliciously bad. TV Guide named it as one of the 100 best television episodics ever made, and that has to be because it's incredibly bad. I mean, there isn't a single scene in that, whatever it is, 50 minutes of television that isn't so over the top and so ridiculous and so nonsensical and so insane that, you know, the only way you can look at it is like, you're Alice, you're at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and what an interesting place to be, you know? That's all you can do is say, I'm Alice at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. That was how I looked at it. I looked at it as like, wow, you're all insane. Everything around me, around Will, and when I say me, you know, I definitely was separating. I didn't believe I was, you know, living on the Jupiter too. But you know, all I could think was, everything around me is crazy, so I have to keep it together. Because as usual, I think I saved the day, but or he saved the day. Yeah, but it's just horrible, and for decades I was just angry kind of about it. You know, when I was in my 20s or 30s, if someone had talked to me about, you know, the Great Vegetable Rebellion, I would just kind of go, oh please, I don't want to talk about that. You know, are you ridiculous? I'd get angry. You know, now it's just like, wow. You know, it's just like I was a part of that. I was in that. Yeah, that was me. Wow. I still couldn't watch it though. I mean, there's no way I would watch it. I mean, if someone would have to pay me a lot of money to sit through the time to watch that episodic show, because I remember it pretty well.
Yeah, watched it again last night.
Oh God, Jonathan becomes rooted and he's green and he's talking about celery and stalk, and that poor guy. Stanley Adams, right, who was Tybo, the talking carrot. I mean, can you imagine getting that check? Can you imagine? I don't know anything about him. I'm sorry to say I don't know anything about him, but I can only assume that he went home to a family. You know, assuming he went home to a family at the end of a day's work on that. How was work today, dear? Well, let me tell you. Here's what I did today to bring home the bacon. I played a talking carrot all day long. Well, to me, it's like I dream of genies on the air, and so's that girl. You know, what are they? They're sitcoms or half-hour shows with chicks in them. You know, Star Trek, you can certainly look back and say, okay, well, Star Trek and Lost in Space are two shows that were on network television in the mid-'60s, and the environments, arenas that these stories took place in is on alien worlds, in outer space, in the future, with various aliens and various what you would call science fiction or fantasy plots to deal with. Star Trek is in essence a military show, but it was ridiculous too, a lot of the time. But it's in essence a military show. In essence, Lost in Space is a family show. I loved Star Trek as a kid. Star Trek wins every challenge, you know, you can assign it, with the exception of the fact that we had John Williams do our music. I mean, and our robot looked great. You know, the robot looked great. Bob Kinoshita, who had designed Robbie the Robot for Forbidden Planet, designed our robot. And I think our props were great. The Chariot was cool, the Jupiter 2 was cool, the robot was cool. But, you know, come on, Star Trek's made, what, 9 feature films or something? I mean, it spawned 4 or 5 6, 7-year runs, various spin-off series over the years. I mean, Star Trek wins. You know, I was so happy. I got to be in Star Trek, and I got to write 3 episodes of the comic book for DC Comic Books with the classic Trek characters. So I had a great time. You know, Shatner lived around the corner from me in Cheviot Hills when we were doing the show. I used to see him once in a while. I'd see Leonard Nimoy at the beach down at Santa Monica on the weekends and stuff. I mean, we weren't friends, but, you know, hey, you're in Star Trek. Hey, you're the kid on Lost in Space. Yeah, well, look, we all got jobs, and it's a nice day, isn't it? Yeah. I really think, honestly and truly, I think it breaks down to the writing. I just think it breaks down to what's on the page. You know, if a writer has legitimately has a theme and a story to tell. You know, now that doesn't mean they all have to be moral parables, but if you have a theme and you have a story to tell, and it's on the page, then you're definitely ahead of the game. If you're lucky, the people that take it out of your hands then are going to cast it well. And if you're even luckier, the people that take it out of your hands then are going to get somebody who can direct that episode well. And if they're lucky, they're going to have a DP who can shoot it well. And if they're all lucky, they're going to get somebody who can score it at the end well, properly, not over the top, right? They just score it properly. It's a lot of elements, you know. To make a good television show, it's like a band. You know, all it takes is one guy who's out of tune. You know, there's keyboards, there's guitars, there's bass, there's drums, and there's singers, and there's one guy who's out of tune. One guy. And as you watch it or as you hear it, you're going, something's not right here. You know, it's because that guy's G-string is sharp. You know what I mean? All it takes is one guy who's sticking the boom in the shot, or, you know, one actor who's just terrible and not there. And all it takes, it's like you really have to have this collective groove going with so many people to make a television show. It's very much a collective project. For a large part, the group of people that are passionate about science fiction, whether that's literary science fiction or cinematic science fiction or televised science fiction or comic book science fiction, a large percentage of those people are awkward in terms of the general society's perception of them. A large society of those people are outsiders. They're not athletic. They're not handsome. They're not pretty. They're overweight. Maybe they have physical disabilities. But they can allow the woes that the world has placed on their shoulders to disappear into this fantasy arena of science fiction where those kind of issues that they have to deal with aren't there. They go away. Largely, largely Roddenberry had a great influence on that, because in the universe that Star Trek was in, you know, there is no racial prejudice. You know, everybody isn't beautiful, and they get along. I mean, you know, they're functioning well. There's no sexism. There's no prejudice against things, and I think that's largely why there is such a passion from the science fiction community. And when you go to a convention, I don't care if you're a Shriner or, you know, if you're a car salesman, you know, people go to conventions and they let their hair down, you know. So if you're somebody who's been uncomfortable at the prom, if you're somebody who's been uncomfortable, you know, at the gig, whatever, and you go to the science fiction convention, you find that you are comfortable. This community isn't judging you on your weight, or whatever, your skin control, you know, your acne or something. I mean, and I think after a very short amount of time, in the early 80s, it became known that, hey, we got a thing here. We can go to these conventions and have a great time and be really happy and cool and meet celebrities and get autographs, and we can keep this going. We got to keep this going. And it really then snowballed into big business for a while. Now, you know, we're dealing with serious economic crisis right now. And the convention, the sci-fi convention business, like everything else, has dwindled to a very small thing compared to what it was 10 years ago or so. But it's still a great sanctuary for the awkward and the imagination seekers. You know, I don't know if that's the right phrase, imagination seekers, but those that just, you know, feel comfortable in fantasy more than reality prime. I've had a lot of good times at sci-fi conventions, you know, met a lot of nice people, and met certainly more than a small percentage of people who take it way too seriously. There, you know, for every celebrity of any level, I don't care if you're the weather girl on a local news station in Wichita, Kansas, or if you're George Clooney. For every celebrity of any level, there is at least one or two hardcore, like, not quite right people who can fixate on you. And that's, you know, in the science fiction community, they're there. I've had people strangle me, people put their hands on my neck in an elevator because I wouldn't wish them into the cornfield. I've had serious death threats in my life. I've had guys show up at my house, walk into my house, you know, past the gate and everything, just walk in to my house demanding that I sign these things for them. And I've had a lot of scary experiences in my day. Really, swear to God. Really. I've had people at sci-fi conventions in tears saying to me, "Will, why wouldn't they let you make that phone call, Will? Why wouldn't they let you make that phone call?" Because it wasn't in the script, you know, it wasn't in the script. I've had people talk to me about, you know, was the space pod, was that digital technology? Was that analog technology? It was Christmas lights under some fiberglass. What do you think? I've had doctors say to me, look me straight in the face. Not in the last 10 years, but I swear to God, I've had doctors look at me and say, "So was that robot real?" I'm thinking, you don't operate on me. You know, yeah, the robot was real. Yeah, it was real. When he was playing the guitar and stuff, yeah, we just programmed him like that. Yeah. Whew. What is it about the Beatles that make you want to listen to Rubber Soul again or Revolver again? You've heard it 1,000 times, right? But, you know, if you go back to it, it's still right. It's still there. It still does its thing. It takes you to a better place. It sends you away from anything else, and it makes you go, wow, God, that was great. You know, and if I watch Robert Redford's death in the Twilight Zone, I don't know. I after 22 minutes, I'm like, God, that was great. Ah, that was really great. Mother. I mean, it was just great. It was just a great, you know. There's an X factor there. I like the X-Files too. But there's an X factor there in certain things. And it's different for everybody. There's 31 flavors, you know what I mean? Everybody's got their favorite. There are some shows that were, and I won't name them, but there are some shows that were on the air for 9, 10 years that I never could understand, ever. I'd go, this is what America loves? These guys are making that much money for that? You know? And then there's shows that come and go, and you go, wow, that was really great. How come that one didn't last? You know? So who knows? I don't know what it is. I'm just proud to be a part of the game. Well, I think that some people have natural abilities, and they're good at certain things. Some kids play Little League, and they can really pitch. Most of them can't. Most of them can't pitch a ball, right? But some of them can. They can really pitch. Some of them can hit. Somebody that's 3 or 4 years old can sit down at the piano and within a couple of lessons or something, really play. Some kids can study it for 2 years and bang out do, re, mi. Some kids were very lucky to be on television, and when you watch their performances, just like adults, you go, and some kids were really good. So I think there's a natural ability there, but from my own, and I do think I have that natural ability to play. I think that the epitome of acting can be reduced to playing cops and robbers. If you see little kids playing cops and robbers, and one of them goes, and the other one goes, ah, right? That's the epitome of acting. It doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, if you believe, gotcha, that's it. You're acting. Well, if you can take the purity of that play and simply add these words that you're supposed to memorize to it and hit your mark on that floor there without looking at it, if you can do that, right, maybe you should be in the game, you know? But certainly working with people like Jimmy Stewart, Rod Serling, Claude Rains, Lucille Ball, Jonathan Harris, countless others that I had the opportunity to work with. Great director Norman Tokar did all the first 100 Leave It to Beavers, directed 2 films that I did when I was young. He used to just take me aside right before we would shoot. He'd say one word to me, one word. Think. That's all. He'd say think to me. It did more for me to just get focused before action. Just stay focused. Think. Oh, right. Okay. Right. I got to cry because I'm sad. Right. Think. I mean, everybody's got their little buttons that can be pushed, you know? And I couldn't help but see greatness when I worked with great people. Great people. I mean, I had the opportunity to work opposite some of the greatest talent that's ever walked a soundstage. Directors as well as actors. So if you're working with somebody who's great, and then you work with somebody who's just barely good, you have, whether you're 6 years old or whether you're 60 years old, you recognize, well, that guy's great. That guy was okay, but not really, but that guy was great. So what was he doing? And you realize, well, he's believing it. He's believing it. Oh, okay, so I should believe it. So this is a talking carrot here. Okay, all right, let's go, action. That's all there is to it.